G'day folks, my name is Rob and welcome back for another F1 fantasy video. Today I'll be speaking to Tom, also known as POTPANMANF1 in the F1 fantasy community. In 2023, Tom finished 84th out of 2.5 million teams and backed that up last season with a top 10k rank. Today we're going to talk about Tom's F1 fantasy journey, some changes and updates the game could make to improve its gameplay this season, and at the end of the video we'll do a very quick F1 fantasy quiz, so if you're interested in participating as well, be sure to hang around for that. But this guest interview series is not the only thing new on this channel, as I'm sure you've noticed by now. I've also made a number of changes to the graphics, branding, and all that good stuff that comes with being an F1 fantasy page on YouTube. So it's the same old me, but a brand new layout. If you like any of what you're seeing with that overhaul, be sure to let me know down in the comments below, as well as any changes or updates you'd also like to see. But in the meantime, I won't hold you any longer, so I hope you enjoy the video. So everyone, thanks for watching today. I've got Tom, also known as POTPANMAN, as one of my first guests on my YouTube channel. Tom, we've joked about this a little bit in the past because I was one of your guests on your channel last year, and now you're one of my first today. Glad I can return the favor. How have you been, mate? How are you enjoying the off-season?
Thank you very much, Rob. Pleasure to be here. It's not a very cliche thing to say, but it's genuinely a pleasure to be on and chatting to you about F1 Fantasy, a hobby for both of us that we enjoy so much that we decided to spend hours talking about it on YouTube as well. So yeah, really doing well. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to hear. Have you been disconnecting entirely from F1 Fantasy in the off season, or have you been probing a little bit?
Yeah, like through December, I was just completely like off F1 entirely. Like. Just nice to have a complete break from the game and break from content and everything. Turn of the year, I started dabbling in a few things in terms of like making my own videos look a little bit nicer, that sort of thing. And then when you messaged me, it was like, bam, right, we're back in the game. We've got to start thinking F1 fantasy. But yeah. It's been nice to switch off. But yeah, ready to get back into it.
Yeah, I think same for me. Like I very much am enjoying the downtime. I go completely AWOL as soon as Abu Dhabi wraps up, and I think now it's easing back into it. Preseason testing is going to be here before we know it, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the new season. And for those of you that don't already follow Tom on his YouTube channel, his socials will be in the description below and in the video, but he runs his own F1 fantasy channel, POTPANMAN, and you should definitely subscribe if you don't already. I consider you the founding father of F1 fantasy content, because before I jumped into this, there was very few, if any, content. And I'm just curious, I never really asked you this in the past, but like, where and how did this come about for you? Did you just jump right into it? Was there always a burning desire to give this a crack?
Just wanted to be just rich and famous, living the YouTube dream, basically. No, honestly, the truth is that I, like many people probably watching this video right now, was seeking some content. I was looking for someone to talk about F1 Fantasy, and I looked on YouTube, and there was just like nothing going on. It was pretty much the tumbleweed just kind of rolling around. So I was like, okay, well, if no one else is going to do it, then I'll take on the burden. So fired up the laptop and started making some videos, and it's kind of developed from there, to be honest. And it's kind of interesting how it's gone from that feeling that kind of need to now it's more like I just really enjoy all the interactions with all the viewers and people commenting on my videos and responding to them, bouncing ideas off each other, interactions in live streams. It's just I never expected to have that much sort of engagement. So yeah, that's been really great.
No, neither. That's what I love about the F1 fantasy community. Everyone's just so nice and so willing to engage, and even though we may not ever reach the lofty heights that is, say, the content creators that do Fantasy Premier League or fantasy football in the US, for example, I still love that everyone's so supportive and willing to have a chat. And I mean, I for one didn't really have much of a creative bone in my body and just kind of jumped right into it. Is that kind of how it came about for you? There wasn't kind of any kind of background or creative desires to exert your fantasy knowledge?
No, my real life job is nothing too creative about that. I have dabbled in like YouTube many years ago. If you fancy a bit of a laugh, I did quite a few like old Call of Duty videos and stuff back in the day. So they're still on there if you want to go have a laugh at them. But no, in terms of actual general creativity, like no. But I think it's just more about having a passion for this game, and I think that kind of comes across in our videos, and that's why people are kind of interested in listening.
I will say I have perused your Call of Duty content from years ago. A few quick scopes in there, but maybe that's a conversation for another time. But I'll bring us back into F1 Fantasy. It's your 5th season, if I'm not mistaken, playing the game in 2025. You know, I've had many a laugh about some of the content you've put out around your violin segment. I think it's become kind of infamous in F1 Fantasy circles if people watch your videos. And I think obviously the violins do highlight some of the low points in different people's F1 Fantasy seasons. I don't want to just spend time talking about lowlights, but is there a particular high that you've had in F1 Fantasy in the last 4 or 5 years, and is there conversely a low as well?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's been quite a few highs and quite a few lows, I'd say. I think like it's human nature for those kind of low points to stick in your mind more. Maybe it's like you just, you know, they get under your skin. It's like, But no, in terms of high points, I definitely think, I mean, 2023 for me was my best season like in any fantasy game ever, finishing 84th in the world, which I'd be surprised if I ever repeat something like that, to be honest. So yeah, that was definitely a highlight, and I think a part of the another highlight which kind of contributed to that was the Monza race where I used the limitless chip, and I had quite a lot of debate about using limitless chips during sprint weekends, and that is the general consensus, and I agree with that. But at the time, it just felt right to use it that weekend, and it ended up boosting me up like quite massively. So that was like, in terms of a given weekend, I'd say that was really, really good, because like right up to like the final hour before the deadline, I was deliberating using that limitless chip. So yeah, that was a real high moment for me to get that as a successful chip use.
Do we see more of the violin in 2025?
Oh yeah, I'm almost sure. I'm certain it will come back out. Like I'm hoping, praying that there'll be some changes to the scoring system, so we might not see quite such extremes that we saw, for example, Monaco last year. I'm thinking the Haas owners, you know, we saw scores of like negative 100 and beyond. It was just insane. But I'm sure there'll still be plenty of, you know, literal car crashes of teams this coming year. So. Yeah, the violin is it's like it's in its case at the moment, but it'll be I'm sure.
Maybe a string quartet, as I've mentioned in the past, if it gets really bad. But I do want to talk about strategy, because you obviously talked about your rank of 84th in the world a couple of seasons ago. I think one of the best in terms of the F1 fantasy creator content creator community.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, that I've ever seen. I think we've had some really good results from the crew in the last couple of seasons, but I think 84th does take the cake. And strategy, I think, such a big part of F1 fantasy, to be completely honest. I think everyone, in many ways, has their own unique strategy, but for someone that has achieved those lofty ranks, I mean, I think there's kind of two parts to my question. The first is, what were the kind of approaches, or what was the kind of key takeaways from that really good season that pushed you up the ranks that maybe you'd think about doing in the future, or advice you might give to someone else? And the second part of the question is kind of, how do you approach the strategy for the weekend generally?
Okay, yeah, that's quite a big double-barrel question there. We'll try and get into it. So in terms of what happened, what went well in 2023, I would say the main thing is probably being adaptable quickly. Things change quickly in F1. Cars are getting bolted on, new upgrades on almost a weekly basis. And just being prepared to take a bit of a risk, put your neck on the line a little bit, rather than just staying safe, which is exactly what happened in 2023 with that template early on in the season with the triple Red Bull, triple Aston Martin. I think just having a bit of confidence to push away from that template at the right moment. There was a temptation to go earlier than when I actually did it, but I ended up sort of just edging away on the Silverstone weekend, where I went with Piastri over Stroll, and that was a nice differential, because that was a weekend McLaren did really well around Silverstone. So, and then suddenly the template very quickly over the next 2-3 weeks shifted into McLaren, but I was already like a race or two ahead of that template. So yeah, I think just getting ahead of the curve where you can without taking stupid risks. I think that's kind of my biggest takeaway from that season.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I kind of had, the shoe for me was on the other foot in 2024, because I got stuck with like not a great budget after a couple of DNS, and you obviously want to take those punts to get ahead of the rest of the I guess the leaderboard or the rest of the player base. But a limited budget you can only do so much with. So I was in a bit of a quandary some weekends where I was like, do I punt on Mercedes and just hope that teams have DNFs? And even though Ferrari looked good, it's like a kind of a gamble that sometimes you want to take, but you're not entirely confident it will pay off. So I feel like it's a bit of a tough situation we're sometimes faced with in this game and how assets are priced.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. In terms of how I'd approach like a given weekend, I guess any other weekend, I can sort of talk you through how I approach the whole week, really, because it's not really a weekend. So the action starts like already, like as soon as the race the previous race finishes, if you like. So at the end of like a race, I'll then like check out all the data and everything that's come out of it, look who's had good race pace and etc. And I also look closely at things like driver interviews, team principals, what they've said, because quite often they give up snippets of information about the oncoming race in like a week's time, whatever, which is particularly important, I find, for drivers and constructors from like the lesser teams, particularly when you're trying to pick your best, as I call them, C-tier drivers. Well, we're not super familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of the car as we are, for example, like McLaren, Ferrari, etc. We are quite au fait with the different strengths and weaknesses of those cars, but listening to those driver interviews for the other teams really can give you that little snippet of information on like a Sunday evening. And then going in for the next few days, I'd say is more like tinkering with my own team, checking my updated budget, just going through a few different possibilities of team selection, and seeing what's actually physically possible within the constraints of the budget, and then simultaneously thinking about, okay, who's gonna look good this weekend? Who does this track suit? Which drivers are on form? Who's had a good track record here previously? Just starting to think about those sort of things as the week progresses. And then come Thursday, we've got media day. Again, more driver interviews. I listen quite a lot to what they're saying. How confident are they? The drivers do give up quite a lot of information, I find. So yeah, I pay close attention to that. And then of course we've got Friday practice sessions, which are the biggest sources of information that we have throughout the whole week. So yeah, paying close attention. If I can watch them, then I'll watch them, obviously. Particularly FP1, FP2 on a Friday can be difficult with work commitments, but I do watch them when I can. And then just taking as much information as I can from the practice sessions. Again, more information from interviews on the Friday, and going into FP3 on the Saturday is then a case of sort of collating all those thoughts that I've built up over the weekend. Has what I thought earlier on the weekend coincided with what's happened through the practice sessions? Looking at F1 fancy tools like simulations, does that also match up to where I'm thinking? Is it completely different to what I was thinking? Do I need to rethink everything? And it's kind of my overall process is going through kind of almost like a day by day, take it one step at a time and then put it all together.
I feel like you just hit the nail on the head with very much what my weekend process looks like as well. I'll rewind a bit. You did talk about how the drivers feel and the sentiment towards the car and the performance of that. And I feel like for me, it's going to be something I pay closer attention to this season, because I think last year, I can't speak for every person in the community, but I felt on several occasions I got really hung up on the simulations for race and quali pace that F1 put out after free practice 2. And you look at a weekend like Las Vegas, where Mercedes were not expected to be anywhere near the front and they ended up coming out on top. And I just wonder if that becomes almost like a misleading data point in the future, and we do have to kind of really get clued into what the drivers are feeling like instead. I've all the years I've been playing this game, I've always paid close attention to what the drivers are saying, because they are, at the end of the day, the best source of information. They're the ones who've got their hands on the wheel and their feet on the pedals. So if they're saying, I feel good, the car feels good, blah, 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 then listen to them. Like, we should be backing these drivers. It obviously doesn't work all the time, and I was thinking, pick out one example last year where Alex Albon was talking about how the car felt good and he thinks their race pace is good. This was going into the Brazilian Grand Prix, whereas we all know like Williams had a sort of double crash out of that, and didn't end well. But no.
In general, though, I do pay quite a lot of attention, put quite a lot of weight on the words of the drivers.
That's a good point. I think something I'll definitely be keeping more of an eye on this season for sure, and kind of what that means from a kind of team decision point of view. Now, in terms of strategy from the outset, and I want to kind of pick your brains on this a little bit because I think it'll be a really focal point of the fantasy discussions in the early stages or in the lead up to the start of the season. So we learned a lot about kind of budget building and assuming the pricing model for the A tier, B tier and C tier stays the same in 2025. I know before the game has gone live, we're talking about this. But I'm curious to know kind of what your maybe way too early approach looks like for building budget early on, because we know how powerful that can be later in the year.
Yeah, so in seasons gone by, I haven't had a big focus on budget, but I think last year showed like how powerful it can be to grow that budget. And I think now we've cracked the algorithm within the community. We know, like you say, these A tier, B tier, C tier setup, providing that stays the same going into 2025, which I feel like it will. I feel like it's too much hassle for them to fiddle around changing that algorithm, but you never know, maybe they'll throw us a curveball. But I feel like it's going to stay the same, and if it does, that gives us a great amount of information about who is going to be good for building budget. Now, last year, like you touched on, a lot of us sort of went with the A tier startup team, where we had like Verstappen, Red Bull, and then a smaller constructor. I'll be, a bit more reluctant to go down that route this season. Obviously, depends very much on the different pricing aspects as to which constructors actually A tier, who's B tier, etc. But I'm going to be paying close attention and trying to, if I can, maximize the B tier constructors. I feel like the constructors are still going to be very strong regardless of any sort of point scoring changes. I can't imagine it'll be that drastic. I think the constructors will still be very strong this year, so I'm probably going to prioritise them and then try and get the budget more out of the actual drivers themselves. So get the points from the constructors and look at more budget building through the for the drivers, particularly the C tier drivers. Getting on early to the best C tier drivers, I think, is going to be really important. It's going to be tough for the first race or two, perhaps, because we've got a lot of new people coming onto the grid this year. We've lost a lot of previous drivers where we've got lots of data and information, like who's good for overtakes, who's good for positions gained. So we're going to have to act quickly this season to get on top of who are those new people that are going to come in and be good at overtakes and who's going to be good at positions overgained. Yeah, and that's obviously going to depend on car performance and everything as well. So we've got to act quickly to get these C tiers in there, get those price gains, because they go up $500,000 for just a pretty average race half the time. So if we can maximise that, the budget's off to a flying start.
Yeah, I agree. I think the B tier is that kind of sweet spot a little bit, to be honest. And I think Mercedes, and I'm curious to see if we do have a Ferrari in the B tier, because McLaren and Red Bull, I think, are probably on the threshold of being in the A tier. Maybe Red Bull, maybe not with Liam Lawson, but I do think Ferrari is kind of touch and go, a B tier or an A tier, and it could be Mercedes early on, a popular pick. I was going to ask this question a little later in the show, but I may as well bring it up to this point now. I think you raise a good point about like what those possible early gems could look like, and I know it's very hard for us to say confidently it's going to be driver A or constructor B or whatever the asset might be, but are there any early thoughts you have on potential reliable options in the driver and constructor department?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of in terms of C tier or just in general?
Oh, just across the board.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking in terms of C tier, or what I presume to be C tier, would be like the Haas drivers I'm quite interested in. Haas had a really strong sort of latter part of last season, looking good with Magnussen and Hulkenberg. Now, obviously, they've changed their driver lineup quite a lot, but they're bringing in another experienced driver in Ocon, who has historically been good for overtakes. And then we've also got Behrman coming in there as well, who's had some experience in F1 and has looked pretty sturdy as a F1 asset when he has come in. So yeah, I'm potentially tempted on them. Maybe they could be nicely priced for us to tempt us into the Haas drivers. I think Mercedes are a tricky one, because it's like I feel like they're going to almost certainly be a B tier asset in terms of constructor. But I am a bit scared trusting the likes of Antonelli on his rookie season. Same. Russell is capable, but also capable of something bad going on. It's not like super consistent. So, but nevertheless, they still have a potentially race-winning car, depending on what's happened over the winter and that sort of thing. So, Mercedes, I'll be paying close attention to. Past that it's really difficult to say because we haven't had testing as of the time of
No.
recording this, and but yeah, definitely those are maybe some options I'm keeping my eye on, and the Ferraris as well. Maybe just at the top of the pile, just they look strong again towards the latter part of last season with Hamilton coming in. It's a pretty tasty lineup for them.
Yeah, I really am excited to see what kind of Lewis and Charles collectively are capable of this season. I think from a fantasy perspective, I guess we have to wait and see what they look like. There's talks that the car will be pretty different from what we saw last season, so I wonder if that means a suddenly championship winning car or if it's a kind of bottom of the top teams setup they've got going on.
Yeah, speaking of bottom of the top teams, I'm very curious as to where Red Bull might come in because they really were not on top for the last part of the last season, which makes me quite curious about Liam Lawson's pricing as well. Is he going to be a juicy underpriced asset with Red Bull actually doing well, like being back on top with some nice winter updates, or is Liam Lawson going to be overpriced? I don't know. That's going to be quite an interesting price point for me for Lawson because I think he could, if he's nicely priced, could be a really nice way into the Red Bull points.
I think he has to come in ahead of Kimi just because that car has been historically stronger than the Mercedes. So I think kind of him and Kimi are probably the two lowest drivers priced in terms of the top teams, and then I think George Russell comes in ahead of those two, but I think, like you say, it depends on pricing, and he could really be a steal. He also could be completely irrelevant if they get the price wrong for him. Yeah,
let's hope the prices are right, like they were last season. They did a pretty good job of the pricing last season, I felt. So
they did.
Let's hope that's repeated.
except for not basing it on pre-season, but I think over the course of the season, given how varied the results were, it wasn't as big of a deal. Now, I think something I and you and many other F1 fantasy players alike have an opinion on is kind of what needs to change in 2025. There was obviously that community survey that was shared towards the latter stages of 2024, and I think a lot of people voiced their opinions on what they'd like to see tweaked or kept or removed entirely. And I think to elevate the fantasy product for 2025, is there anything in particular you'd like to see the game change? It could be gameplay, it could be scoring, it could be the user interface, just to make it better than what we had a year ago.
Yeah, probably all of the above that you've just stated. just improve everything. Like I think the game last year was good, but I mean, it was good because prices turned out to be good, but it was also good because the actual competitiveness of the actual F1 grid became really close, and everything became really tight, and there's lots of variation in teams, but that wasn't really something that was generated by the F1 fantasy developers themselves in terms of how they've laid out the point scoring and everything. I'd like to see some more variation in terms of possibilities to score points. As well as a slight reduction in the amount of negative points, because the negative points are just too much of a random thing that just hurt you. So I'd like to see that reduced for sure. But yeah, definitely some more variation in terms of point scoring. A lot of people have arced back to the play-on days where we had like streaks for teams and drivers, beating teammate points, that sort of thing. I would be more than happy to see that sort of aspect brought back in. For example, if a driver finishes ahead of their teammate in the race, they get like 3 points or something. I think that adds just another layer of decision making for fantasy managers through a given weekend, and that then extra decisions leads to extra variation in teams, which is a good thing for the game. We don't want to be sat on the same team, so I'd definitely like to see that. And the other thing I'd really like to see is more of a voice from F1 themselves actually talking about the game. We see it a lot in other fantasy games. I myself play a lot of Fantasy Premier League, and they have their own dedicated Twitter account which constantly pumps out stats, podcasts, anything. They're really, really good, and I think that F1, they're not just going to immediately be like that, but they could go in that direction, have their own dedicated channel to it, talk to us a bit more about the game, explain things that are happening in the game, and just be a bit more of a voice rather than just this kind of brick wall that we're banging our head against sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially the last one around the help, because I did see last season F1 was quite good with putting out content on F1 Fantasy itself on the main page. Now, I wonder if it kind of gets lost a little bit in the the clutter of all of the other content that
Yeah.
they're regularly sharing. But
Sure it does, yeah.
there's clearly to me an interest and a desire to produce content. I just wonder if they get more value out of having, as you say, a dedicated channel or page to produce that on. So yeah, interesting to see. I think all of those other changes, like the streaks, and then I think DNF and disqualification penalties is I think another big thing for scoring for the developers to consider for next year. So I think it'll be exciting. I think it'll be a good season. We saw that transfer penalty and no negative changes last season. I think were positive.
Promising that they've shown signs that they are looking to make changes. So let's hope we can push that a bit further this year.
Yeah, excited to see. So. Now I'm going to get into the fun part of the show. Tom, when you had me on your channel last year, you did a very comprehensive F1 fantasy quiz that...
Get your own back.
I think I got something like 3.5 or 4.5 out of 10 or whatever the score was. So it was a pretty terrible outing. Mine's definitely not as extensive as yours is. But I did want to have something for the clued in F1 fantasy players to kind of pick their brains on as we get to kind of the twilight of the show. So I have 5 questions. They're all F1 fantasy related. And if you're watching and you want to play along, just pause the video when we get to the end of the question. So I'll have 5, and depending on how tricky it is to navigate, I might give you a hint or two along the way. So question 1, Tom.
Okay, I'm ready.
Hopefully an easy one. Who was the highest scoring driver in F1 fantasy in 2024?
Oh god, this is... I should immediately know this, shouldn't I? But the highest scoring fantasy asset in 2024 is... it's got to be Norris. It's got to be Norris, right? I'm going to say Norris.
It was close.
It's wrong.
It was actually Max Verstappen, you wouldn't believe. He averaged 31.4 points per race ahead of Lando Norris's 29 and Leclerc's 28.5. So even though Max was obsolete for the second half of the year, he still managed to score enough points.
I think that's what swayed me to go Norris. Is like all those Driver of the Days he scooped up as well, and just like some strong finishes. But yeah, can't rule out Max Verstappen.
It's inevitable.
If in doubt, go with Max.
Yeah. I think that might change this season, but I was very surprised he was edging ahead of Lando in those last couple of races. I think Brazil probably also helped him with that back of the grid drive and driver of the day and all that stuff.
77 points, something.
Yeah. I almost thought to include that question, but I thought you might get that in a heartbeat.
I would have got that. That's probably a harder question to get than the obvious one. But
well, we'll get to low scores in just a moment. But question number 2. There was only one driver that didn't go up in price from their starting price at the beginning of the season. I will give you a hint and say he wasn't in a backmarker team, but he wasn't in a front runner team.
Okay. Wait, so he didn't go up in price all season?
He actually went down in price from his starting season.
Oh, so he
price.
did. He potentially went up a bit, but then dropped back
down
or something.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. These questions are good. They're really getting my fantasy brain working. They're probably going to humiliate me when I get 0 out of 5 right. Let's see, who went down? I'm tempted to say one of the Aston Martins possibly, because they didn't really do much. Stroll definitely. I'm pretty sure Stroll ended up higher up. It could be Alonso as like a B tier who didn't really do much last season. And the Alpines went up. The Hazes went up. Yeah, I feel like Fernando Alonso. I'm gonna take a bit of a punt on Alonso here.
That's correct, Tom. Well done off the bat.
Thank God for that. I didn't get the wooden spoon here of 0 points.
I think it was I think for me at least when I was looking at this, it probably would have been like as you say, like process of elimination. Fernando actually went down 0.5 million. So kind of as you say, more or less right where he started the year, and wasn't really an option for any of us throughout the entire season. So question number 3. There were 3 drivers that had 10 or more consecutive races of 20 or more fantasy points. Can you name at least one of the 3?
So 20 or more for 10
fantasy
consecutive, 10 consecutive races. I'm pretty sure Piastri would be in that group. I want to say Piastri would be in there. Possibly also Leclerc. Piastri could be a couple of good options. 20 plus. The only other options, who is there? Like, don't think it would be the Mercedes. Could be Max Verstappen. I've already pushed him to the side in one answer, so we'll go Verstappen, Piastri, Leclerc.
You had 2 out of the 3.
Okay, I'll take that.
So Leclerc actually had the longest streak of 20 or more fantasy points between Hungary and Abu Dhabi with 12. Oh. And then Lando and Oscar had 10 each.
All right.
So Oscar between Austria and Mexico, and Lando Norris between when he won the Dutch Grand Prix and Abu Dhabi.
Wow.
So
okay.
you got the answer.
I'll take 2 out of 3.
you got the answer. Because I did ask for 1 out of the top 3. So currently 2 out of 3. I think this will be a bit of a tricky question. Question number 4.
Okay, I'm ready.
According to F1 Fantasy Tools Elite data, which weekend was the most widely used for all 6 chips by the top 500 global?
Wow, what a question.
So I think kind of to make it a bit easier to understand for anyone watching and playing along at home, it is kind of as a percentage of total chips used of that weekend. So 100% meaning every single person in the top 500 activated a chip that weekend. Which weekend is what I'm looking for.
That's interesting, because initially I would have said like maybe something like China sprint weekend early on in the season when lots of people are still kind of engaged with it. But then would the top 500 going into China have done that, or would it be later on? Like, I feel like it's either like something like China or one of the latter parts, like, you know, like a Brazil possibly, where people are using all sorts of no negative. Some people use free time, some people use autopilot. Brazil will probably been quite popular. Yeah, it's got to be Brazil or China in my mind. I'm going to say Brazil. I'll say Brazil.
Great answer, Tom. That's correct. Brazil topped all races with 63.4%. So that was a weekend particularly popular for no negative, where 25% of players in the top 500 used their no negative because it was an extremely wet weekend. A daring 15% went with the 3X chip.
I was tempted that weekend, but backed off of that rain.
They were the kind of 2 chunkiest ones. There were 3 other chips that had, you know, between 7 and 9% of use. So that kind of bumped it up into the 60s. Qatar was second, and China, as you said, was third. So
lots of people at the end of the season just scurrying around trying to use chips up, I guess.
Yeah, I think China was another popular one because a lot of people had either limitless or no negative because it was, I think, a wet sprint weekend. Yeah. And can see why that was creeping up. So you're 3 out of 4 heading into the last question. Question number 5. This may be a tough one, but you may get it as well. Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg had the 3 lowest fantasy scores of 2024. Who had the 4th?
Oh, what a cruel question. I was thinking, I know the answer to this. It's going to be like Monaco. It's going to be Brazil. He's going to ask me like where they had their lowest scores. But no, okay. Who had the 4th of the lowest scores? Oh God. Let me think. Could very easily be a Williams driver. Trying to think, because I know Albon got disqualified in the Zandvoort qualifying, but I don't think he DNF'd in that race. From what I can remember, he might have. If he didn't, no, he didn't. I'm pretty sure. Who else could it be then? Who else got the 4th? This is where you have to edit the video whilst I'm just like scratching my head for about 10 minutes.
No. All going in.
It could also be I'm trying to think of like combinations of disqualification plus DNF, but I feel like past like the Hazes in terms of Monaco and Hulkenberg in Brazil, I'm not sure that really happened. Who had a cataclysmic weekend? I honestly can't think of the actual answer to this. I'm gonna have to take a bit of a wild guess, I think.
Do you want me to give you a hint, or would you like to go?
I'm more than happy to have a hint here. Let's
think back to disqualifications, drivers that were disqualified over the season, because there were a couple of others outside of the hazards, but you'd have to think.
Who got disqualified? Was it Gasly? Gasly had a pretty. Did Gasly get disqualified or something in? Or he failed to qualify or something in Silverstone, didn't he? Something bad happened in
No emotions.
Oh dear. Oh yeah, I don't know. My mind is like blank this part, and it's put it into a distant part of my memory. I'll just hazard a guess and say Gasly. I can't remember.
It's a fair assessment, because he did have a few DNFs, but it was actually George Russell disqualification in Spa.
God, I already have put that to the back of my mind, because I owned George Russell that weekend.
As did I.
Of course. Oh, thanks for bringing back my memories of race winner to the worst possible score that weekend. Yeah.
That was a violin moment for me this year.
Oh dear, yeah. That's
I think it went from one of my biggest rank jumps to a pretty bad rank drop after the disqualification was announced. So.
Rank climb and climbing up the budget, and then it's like, he's lost 1.5 kilos of weight. Where'd that go?
So yeah, that I believe, Tom, you finished with 3 out of 5, so a very commendable result, given how challenging some of those questions were.
I feel like I didn't humiliate myself, so I'll take that. I'll take a lack of humiliation as a victory here.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap things up, I'm going to do this with guests on my channel throughout the year. We've obviously got pre-season testing coming up, so we don't really have a proper gauge of what drivers and constructors are looking like in the championships. Can I get your predictions for the top 3 in the drivers for 2025 and the winner of the constructors?
Now,
in F1, not in F1 Fantasy.
Oh yeah, predict that. No, this is so hard, because obviously, like I say, we're recording pre-tested and everything. Very, very little, next to nothing, in terms of news has come out in terms of who's looking good through the winter development. If I really had to stick my neck out here, I say based on the strength, particularly in the latter part of last season, and the consistency he showed through a lot of last season, it could be time to move aside Red Bull Mercedes for a new driver champion in Charles Leclerc. I'm just gonna throw it out there. Ferrari fans might be happy with this prediction, but yeah, I do think that Ferrari's just looked really strong towards the latter part of the season. They look like they've become a lot more level-headed with Fred Vasseur at the helm of that team. Charles Leclerc, like I say, had a phenomenal season last season. Hamilton coming in there as well. I feel like the Ferraris, it could finally be their year after so long without the drivers constructor. Can't get my word.
It's all right, mate.
The
Still pre-season.
The constructors championship. I do feel like maybe we'll go Leclerc. I feel like Leclerc. Again, I can't rule out Verstappen, but Leclerc, Norris, Verstappen for the drivers. That
was my pick, my preseason pick for the top 3 as well. And sorry, the championship is going the way of Ferrari.
Constructors will go with Ferrari. Yeah, I feel like they're due, and they've shown a lot of promising signs last season. So we'll go with them. And Hamilton's joining the team. Like it's meant to be.
Well, great. Well, that's it for today. So thanks for the predictions, Tom, and sharing your insights on F1 Fantasy for the upcoming season. It's obviously going to be hopefully a lot of change we see in the game, and I think it's giving us a lot of food for thought as we head into pre-season. Where can viewers find you if they haven't already subscribed to your Twitter and YouTube channels?
Most weekends they'll find me hiding behind the sofa, but if you want to whilst watching the F1 race, not just in general. But no, you can find me over on YouTube, of course, POTPANMANF1. I post out videos every race week. Also over on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. And also more recently, BlueSky. If people are over on BlueSky, I'm also set up an account over there. So those are like the 3 main ports of call. If you want to chat to me in the comments or over on Twitter or whatever, I'm there.
Good. Well, I'm glad we had the chance to reconnect over F1 Fantasy and break bread on our predictions for 2025, Tom. So once again, thank you for coming on, and good luck with your season.
Thank you very much.
So folks, I hope you enjoyed today's video. As mentioned at the start, this is part of the guest interview series on the channel for this year. So do subscribe if you want to see more people on here discussing F1 and F1 Fantasy, as well as all the latest content in the lead up to the Australian Grand Prix and beyond. But in the meantime, have a great day, and I will see you all very soon.